Hey, good day, everybody. Welcome back to Rocky Mountain Readings, where we've been breaking into pretty fast and furious into A Jewish Guide to the Mysterious by Rabbi Pinchas Taylor, and this book has just been awesome. We're learning all about many different mysterious topics and what the Torah has to say on these matters. I think this book is going down as definitively a resource material. And we're in the third section of The Mysterious Soul, and we finished last Thursday with the soul immortality and the afterlife. We finished that chapter, and today we're going to break into near-death experiences, and I think we may even be able to knock off the chapter on reincarnation as well. I don't know any of you guys that may have come out of Christianity. They do not hold to reincarnation. They hold that is appointed unto man once to die and then the judgment. Well, I'm pretty certain that when it comes to reincarnation, as we'll see, the rabbis hold that Hashem owns it all, and he is capable of doing what he will with it. And if there is the hope of somebody achieving potential, Hashem may be the most merciful thing that he does, giving them another opportunity. But I think if you understand a lot of the Jewish perspective, the transition between the separation of soul and body and what can be remembered, or what is important to remember, there's no real connection. So, somebody come back, they don't remember their past, but I'm sure he's going to go into detail of it, quite well. So today, shalom, Mike and Angela in the UK. I'm also given a note from our friend Hans down in Paraguay, who'll be joining us as well. And shalom to everybody, and Shavua Tov. Let's have a great week. And let's see how much we can chunk away. So, Mike, if you're following along with your book, we're on page 256. We're going to start reading near-death experiences, and hopefully you folks will enjoy it. Shalom, Nina, down in Brazil. Always good to have you with us. It's a joy to see you come regularly. It means a lot to me. All right, near-death experiences. He calls them NDE. You know what? I better put my glasses on because I'm getting older, over 50, The eyes aren't what they once were, even though I still have 20/20. Trouble reading up close. Near-death experience is a personal experience associated with the experience of death. With modern advances in life-saving procedures, many people who clinically die are resuscitated. There have been quite a number of individuals who were brought back to life, who have reported strange experiences about their journey post-death. These experiences are commonly described as a variety of sensations, including detachment from the body, feelings of levitation, total serenity, security, warmth, the experience of absolute dissolution, and the presence of a light. The background and study of NDE. I love how Rabbi Taylor has broken this all down like a wise student for sure. The history. Near-death experiences have been recorded since ancient times, and over 95% of the world cultures have been known to make mention of them. And he cites where he gets that from. References of NDE can be found in the folklore and writings of European, Middle Eastern, African, Indian, Pacific, and Native American cultures. The oldest surviving explicit report of an NDE in Western literature comes from Plato, the Greek philosopher, in The Republic, where he discusses the story of a soldier who awoke on his funeral pyre and described his journey into the afterlife. Early studies in more recent times, NDE, have become the subject of serious study by researchers. The oldest known medical report of near-death experience was written by Pierre-Jean de Monchaux, an 18th century French military doctor who described such a case in his book, Anecdotes de Medicine. The first more formal studies of near-death related phenomena developed in the late 1800s when the Swiss geologist Albert von St. Gallen Heim, who was also a mountain climber, had a profound mystical experience having fallen down a mountain. He published a collection of accounts by mountain climbers who had fallen in the Alps, soldiers wounded at war, workers who had fallen off scaffolds, and individuals who had nearly died in accidents or near drownings. All reported experiencing life after death. Now, I don't know if you folks know, but when I was 18, I had a cliff climbing accident. I fell 240 feet. Long story. I shared it once on Tanakh. You can find it in Tanakh. Just search my name on Tanakh. And I did shared that story in depth with William Hall there. It was awesome. 240 feet. And I was fortunate. I was found by a cross-country jogger. Long story. Contemporary research. In the mid-1970s, Dr. Raymond Moody introduced the concept of NDE to the public in a way it had never been presented before. He coined the term near-death experience and painstakingly interviewed over 150 people who were declared medically dead and brought back to life. In all of these cases, the absence of detectable signs of life, such as respiration and heartbeat, were documented in their medical charts. He recorded their firsthand accounts of consciousness and awareness of their body undergoing operation, the hospital room, and the people inside. One such example from Dr. Moody's book reports a woman who, during her NDE, floated above her body and the hospital and saw a shoe on a multi-story building, which was later confirmed in the exact location described. Since then, many teams of researchers all over the world have embarked on this new field of study, and as time progresses, more evidence accumulates. Initially, secular thinkers had thought that during those times of medical death, the person would only experience a blank void that would not be remembered upon their subsequent revival. Instead, the interviewed patients described themselves during their death and entrance to the world beyond as weightless, beyond the strictures of time, and encompassed by a feeling of unconditional love in a way that is not describable in terms living beings can grasp. Some of the people interviewed also said they had communicated with relatives who had long passed, had an encounter with a bright light, and underwent a life review where they experienced the positive and negative effects and repercussions of all the actions of their lifetime. Many told over that during that time they did not wish to return to the body, but were instead forced to in order to correct some earthly task not yet fully accomplished. And this is what I think they hold with the reincarnation. There was, not surprisingly, a mixed reaction to Moody's findings. Many people were very excited. Others were hesitant and skeptical. Of particular note is work Moody did with a Russian doctor who had a vivid recollection of his NDE. Despite the fact that throughout his entire life, the Soviets educated him to deny both God and soul, interestingly, several doctors who were initially cynical and vehemently disapproving of Moody became enthusiastic supporters of near-death experience research after conducting firsthand experimentation and interviews of their own. Skepticism. There are those who would still rather dismiss the patient's entire experience as purely psychological or the beginnings of the natural neurological process of the brain shutting down. Neuroscience studies might suggest that an NDE is a subjective experience resulting from disturbed bodily multisensory integration that occurs during life-threatening events. These researchers, however, are left at the stalemate, for instance, when grappling with how patients correctly related specifics about people or happenings in other rooms or other places. It appears that many of the arguments of the doubters or detractors do not stand up under careful analysis. Interesting anecdotes. Unknowable events. Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, Swiss-American psychiatrist and recipient of over 20 honorary doctorate degrees and pioneer in end-of-life care, began as a skeptic early on in her career. While she was on the faculty of the University of Chicago, she collected 20,000 anecdotes of near-death experiences from around the world. There were certain elements in the NDE stories that drastically reshaped her initial skepticism. These included an account she verified where a blind man described the color and pattern of the operating physician's tie, and a car accident in which NDE children who survived the crash could describe an encounter that had taken place in a separate room. And then he cites where to get that material from. Children. Out-of-body experiences are particularly astonishing when described by children who have had an NDE, who, in their innocence and simplicity, are incapable of accurately fabricating a recollection of emergency room proceedings while their dead body lies on the operating table or recall events taking place simultaneously in their homes that are later corroborated with impeccable accuracy. The evidence mounts further when the ones conducting the research of the children's experience began as skeptics themselves. Many stories have been recorded about children having these experiences. One interesting case is about an 11-year-old who had a cardiac arrest in the lobby of a children's hospital and was rushed into intensive care unit to try to restart his heart. He was without heartbeat for at least 20 minutes. With fervent attempts at cardiac interventions, all at no avail, finally the medical team tried to jolt his heart to start again with the cardio paddles. Miraculously, the boy opened his eyes and said, "That was weird. You just sucked me back into my body." A nurse later confirmed this particular line. The boy had emergency surgery and survived the ordeal. Out of embarrassment, thinking he would be perceived as crazy, he did not share the details of his memories of the ordeal until he was questioned about it in high school. He described being whooshed out of his body and that he was watching the procedure as it took place from a corner on the ceiling. He described in great detail what took place and the location of everything in the room. He accurately related specific phrases that the doctors and the nurses in the room had been saying and what they had been doing. He confessed that he had never heard about NDEs and also did not watch very much television. One particularly fascinating story is about a child named Mark who remembered a near-death experience he had when he was only 9 months old. At that time, he had severe bronchiolitis. While he was in the emergency room, he had a full cardiac arrest. For 40 minutes, the doctors frantically struggled to revive him. Thankfully, they were able to, and he showed no signs of hindered growth or development. While at a holiday pageant at the age of 3, he commented that the person in the play was not what God looked like, and went on to describe how he encountered God. In the emergency room 2 years before, Mark had never been told of his operation or the details of that frantic night. Yet he described the occurrences in the hospital as follows. "I saw the nurses and the doctors standing over me trying to wake me up. I flew out of the room and went to the waiting room where I saw Grandpa and Grandma crying and holding each other. I think they thought I was going to die." He then described the process of crawling up a dark tunnel toward a light and having a detailed encounter with God. The descriptions he gave of the hospital were confirmed as accurate by his startled father. Torah literature on near-death experience. It is interesting that in the above accounts, not only does consciousness not diminish as the brain slowly deadens, but a greater experience of consciousness seems to be reached during this time. This is difficult to explain from a secular worldview, but the spiritually oriented understands that the awareness of the consciousness is much greater as it separates from the constraints of the material brain, ego, and physical body. Hello, Dewey. All right. Although this has only been recently tracked by academia, Jewish tradition has been discussing this phenomenon since the at least Talmudic times, while the term NDE is obviously not mentioned outright anywhere in Jewish tradition. There are many parallels between the way near-death experience survivors report their experience and the way in which the sages describe the journey of the soul following death. For example, some common reports of NDE are a sense of not being among the living and overhearing other people pronouncing them dead. In similar fashion, the Talmud says that the soul hears everything said in front of its lifeless body until the grave is sealed. And he cites where that's listed, Shabbos 152a and 153a. Likewise, the Talmudic sage Rav said, "Be fervent in my eulogy, for I will be standing right there." In essence, he would be listening. Many NDE survivors hear noise, buzzing, hissing, and whooshing sounds. Likewise, Jewish tradition mentions various uncomfortable sounds, and the Midrash compares the soul leaving the body to the sound of rushing waters. And that's out of Koheles Rabbah 6:6. NDE survivors also describe an awareness of separation into a kind of phantom body, energy field, cloud, or form of light. In a similar vein, the Zohar mentions a sort of ethereal body or garment of light that refers to the disembodied soul. Hi, Ashley G. Shalom in California. Additionally, NDE survivors describe themselves passing through a dark doorway, cave, or a tunnel, or valley. Notably, the psalmist describes walking through the valley of the shadow of death. The Zohar also says that the entranceway into heavenly realms is through the cave of Machpelah. Furthermore, NDE survivors describe encountering ethereal, lightweight entities that are familiar to them, such as family members or previously deceased friends. Jewish tradition also says that souls see their relatives and friends and that they accompany them to their place of eternal rest. Husbands and wives find each other in the afterlife. Families and loved ones reunite in the next world, and teachers and students are reunited as well. This sensing of souls from other dimensions of reality can occur even prior to actual death. We see this in the case of the righteous in particular. When Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai was about to pass on, he said, "Prepare a seat for Hezekiah, the king of Judah, who has come to welcome me." There is commonly a description of a bright, all-embracing light, which many people identify as the Creator. This light is one that emanates powerful and unconditionally loving vibes. People describe the immense pleasure that the light makes them feel. Compare this description with the Mishnah. Better one moment in the hereafter than all the pleasures of this world. Furthermore, the soul sees the divine presence before leaving the physical realm. Hey, Johnny Riggs, good to have you from North Carolina. Near-death experiences alone are not proof for the existence and survival of the soul, but the accumulated antidotes, when examined closely, support the concept of a realm beyond this one. That there is more to reality than what the five senses perceive in this physical existence. In essence, we leave off with the words of Dr. Bruce Grayson, professor of psychiatry and director of the Division of Perceptual Studies at the University of Virginia Health System. He says, at the very least, near-death experiences should foster spiritual growth by leading us to question some of our basic assumptions about mind and brain, about our relationship to the divine, and about the universe and our role in it. And that's from his book, The Mystical Impact of Near-Death Experiences. It's good that Rabbi Taylor has broken through this. So that's all he has to say on near-death experiences. And now he breaks into reincarnation. So we've got about 30 some odd pages to go through this. So strap your seats and we're going to just try to go through it. Mike, if you're following along, still we're on page 265. All right. Reincarnation is the idea that after the body dies, the soul is born into another body. This concept was believed in a variety of forms amongst many ancient cultures. It is a belief held by the Greek philosopher Pythagoras, Socrates, and Plato, as well as some of the greater minds that shaped Western civilization. Many are surprised to know that reincarnation has been researched in scientific circles and that the subject has a very strong presence in Jewish literature. Studies and stories. Forgive me, I'm still in the Pacific time zone having my morning coffee. There are a number of reputable and highly qualified medical professionals who, changed from strong skepticism to strong belief in reincarnation after involving themselves in this type of investigation. Dr. Brian Weiss is chairman emeritus of the Department of Psychiatry at Mount Sinai Medical Center in Miami and clinical associate professor of psychiatry at the University of Miami School of Medicine. In 1980, a woman named Catherine stepped into his office with several severe issues and phobias that were preventing her from functioning properly. After using conventional methods of psychotherapy, she agreed to allow him to hypnotize her. In this heightened sense of awareness, she revealed some repressed memories of her childhood that Dr. Weiss believed would help relieve her fears. As is usually the case, they did not. In their next session under hypnosis, once again, she described in great detail a tragedy that had taken place in her village thousands of years prior. Dr. Weiss, who at that time was a highly educated intellectual who had been published in psychology journals and textbooks, was very skeptical. While he dismissed her story as imagination, he was intrigued by her attention to detail. Then something unexpected happened. On her next visit, Catherine said that many of her fears were gone or alleviated. Dr. Weiss remained unconvinced but proceeded with this method of treatment. She revealed other past lives to him and the experience of death itself, which incidentally paralleled the accounts given by near-death experience patients. While reliving each life, she personified each past person that she was. Dr. Weiss was confused as there was no evidence of her being mentally deranged and no incentive for deception. The final blow when the woman revealed to Dr. Weiss several obscure and otherwise unknowable details about his father and son who had passed on years before, including referring to his father by his never-used Hebrew name, Avraham. This was the tipping point. This entire episode completely defied rational explanation. Dr. Weiss no longer felt that Catherine's descriptions were imaginary, as even the most lucid imaginations would not be able to summon impossible facts or cure phobias. He published his case in his widely acclaimed Many Lives, Many Masters. Dr. Helen Wambach. Dr. Weiss was not the only one to start off as a skeptic. Dr. Helen Wambach actually set out to research and conclusively disprove reincarnation. She finished her mission with a complete change of heart. She did a 10-year survey of past life recalls under hypnosis with over 1,000 people. She asked her subjects very specific questions about the time periods in which they lived. She was astounded by the results. Aside from a handful of participants, 11 out of 1,088, she was able to verify the descriptions of clothing, footwear, and utensils that her subjects described with actual historical record of when they claimed to have lived. She said that fantasy and genetic memory could simply not account for the result. Many other initially skeptical researchers have likewise come full circle in their views based on their investigations. Dr. Ian Stevenson. As in the case with near-death patients, the most telling research can be derived from children who claim to remember past lives. Dr. Ian Stevenson, who was the head of the Department of Psychiatric Medicine at the University of Virginia and spent 40 years investigating over 3,000 cases of children who recalled past lives. Astoundingly, in over 40 of these cases, Stevenson encountered not only recollection of past lives, but also physical evidence of unusual birthmarks, scars, or birth defects of children that paralleled medical records for the individual Stevenson identified as the past life personality. Parenthetically, the concept of retaining physical characteristics that carry over lifetimes is not the norm, yet may have some rare parallels in Jewish tradition as well. Stevenson was known to be a cautious, methodical, and conservative researcher. His choice to focus on children makes his research more scientifically sound, as it minimizes the possibility of corruption or forgery. Dr. Jim Tucker is the Associate Professor of Psychiatry and Neurobehavior Sciences at the University of Virginia School of Medicine and protege of Dr. Ian Stevenson. His 2005 book, Life Before Life, recounts over 4 decades worth of scientific research into past life encounters of children. Even among the most steadfast skeptics, including the late Dr. Carl Sagan, they could not help but concede that the research was carefully collected empirical data and not mere embellishment or wishful thinking. There are many documented accounts of children speaking about when they were big and giving precise depictions of another time in history, which can be verified and are far too authentic and vivid to dismiss as mere exceptional imaginations. Dr. Peter Fenwick is a fellow of the Royal College of Psychiatrists who holds a research post as a senior lecturer at the Institute of Psychiatry in London. He has dedicated much study to documenting these cases. One story he mentions is about a boy named Thomas Mather, a pseudonym, who was born in British Columbia in 1892. He began to talk clearly when he was 18 months old and started having recurring nightmares when he was around 2. They were vivid and often about San Francisco. He began giving detailed reports about what appeared to be another life he had lived. When seeing Princess Diana on television, he told his parents about another Diana that he knew when he was big. He started to clearly depict actual places in San Francisco which were verified to actually exist and persistently spoke about when he was big like Daddy. Around the same time, he also spoke often of plane crashes and how the people at the airport were able to see me crash when his plane crashed. He had a terrible fear of flying and of fires. The child also spoke about trees that he had seen in San Francisco, which were prevalent there, but not in British Columbia. And he complained to his teacher in preschool about the mail deposit boxes were the wrong color, as they are blue in the United States, but red in Canada. He also resented being treated like a little boy and did not understand why he could not do the things that adults do, like going out alone. These were some of the key features that led to further investigation. Thomas's story is far from unique. In fact, these type of stories occur much more frequently than one might imagine. The story of James Leninger. Children who experience past lives are a well-known field of paranormal studies that is becoming more widely accepted. One of the most chilling stories of reincarnation in children first garnered attention several years ago. James Leninger is a child who lives in Lafayette, Louisiana. His parents, Bruce and Andrea Leninger, are cultured and educated people. The following is a summary of some of the highlights of Leninger's story. In the year 2000, when James was just 2 years old, he began to have vivid nightmares. Airplane crash, plane on fire, little man can't get out. Andrea ran to his bedroom and saw James struggling. He was lying on his back, kicking and clawing on the covers. This dream would recur 5 times per week with similar fear. James began to deliver incredibly accurate details, later discovered to be centered on a World War II pilot named James Houston Jr. When Andrea asked who the little man in the plane was, James replied, "Me." When Bruce asked James who shot the plane down, James started the Japanese. When he was asked how he knew that it was the Japanese who shot down his plane, James replied, "The big red sun." James had an obsession with World War II airplanes with propellers. In his car seat, James would put on imaginary headphones and a face mask. He also continued to further demonstrate very detailed knowledge about airplanes. When Andrea gave James a toy plane with what looked like a bomber under it, James looked at it and said, "That's not a bomb, Mommy. That's a drop tank." His mother did not even know what a drop tank was. When the nightmares persisted, they asked James more detailed questions about his dreams. The information he divulged was so clear that it became more and more difficult to dismiss. It is also difficult to say that he was being coached or the claim was a hoax, as the child was still in diapers. Yet, he knew the flight characteristics of World War II fighter planes. James was examined and tested by Carol Bowman, a renowned authority on children who have supposedly experienced past lives. She vouched for his authenticity. Eventually, he revealed that he used to fly a Corsair and that his ship was named the Natoma. James knew that the Corsair would veer to the left on takeoff, and that it had a tendency to blow tires out upon landing. He also knew that U.S. flyers gave Japanese bombers girl names and Japanese fighters boy names. When his parents took him to the Lone Star Flight Museum, James was walking around a Corsair engaged in a flight check like a pilot normally does before boarding. Eventually, James also told his father that his plane was shot down at the Battle of Iwo Jima. His father, Bruce, was a hard sell. He was skeptical about these things, and as an evangelical Christian, he claimed reincarnation was in conflict with his faith. After doing some research, he found confirmation of all his son's claims. He also found that there was an annual reunion of surviving crew members of a ship that his son had named as his own, and he began to attend the reunions. He gathered up facts, all confirming the data fed by his son James, including that there was a pilot named James Houston Jr., who was killed in the location and manner that his son described. However, being skeptical and looking for flaws, he was pleased to find out that there were no Corsairs on Natoma Bay, which is the type of plane his son claimed that he flew. However, Bruce later learned from another pilot, Bob Grenwold, that Houston had participated in a program in which Corsairs were tested for aircraft carrier landings. They met up later with some of the crew who had been part of the Natoma. James saw Bob Grenwold, whom he identified on site and named correctly after, recognizing his voice. At the ceremony, little James was also reunited with his old friend Jack Larson. The veterans could not get over the resemblance of this little boy to their old friend. Andrea later tracked down pilot James Houston's sister, Ann. Ann was 84 years old, and they set up a phone conversation between Ann and James. The sister had never had any contact with the ship or the reunions. She sent a batch of photographs of her brother taken during the war, and in a couple of the photographs, pilot James Houston was standing in front of a Corsair. In this conversation, James called her Annie, something that only James Houston ever did. James mentioned their sister Ruth, who was 4 years older than Anne, and that Anne was 4 years older than James, which was correct. He also said that their father was an alcoholic and broke things when drunk, and that he had to go to rehab, and confirmed all of this when she sent James Leninger a drawing her mother had made of James Houston. The child asked where the other picture was. The other picture, which had been buried in the attic for about 60 years, was a drawing of Anne. Her mother had made 2 drawings when they were children. Anne was stunned. No one knew about that other picture except for her dead brother. James Leninger's parents put together a book about this most intriguing story. It was compiled with the assistance of a tough skeptic, Ken Gross, so there's no fluff in the recap. The story was examined under the scrutiny of Jim B. Tucker, a child psychiatrist, and Bonner Lowry, professor of psychiatry and neurobehavioral sciences at the University of Virginia School of Medicine. He concluded that the story deserves serious consideration as an account of reincarnation. The story certainly demonstrates that there is good reason to believe that there is more to life and more to a person than meets the eye. Perhaps even more intriguing is when children or adults start speaking, writing, or even fully conversing in a language they had never been exposed to, or even ones that are ancient and not currently known except by a few experts. The spectacle has a name called xenoglossia. The above is just a sampling of compiled scientific research on the immortality of the soul, although there are many more fascinating documented occurrences that further the evidence. The reader is encouraged to explore these topics more comprehensively using the cited footnotes as a guide and see that the evidence of human survival after death is strong enough to permit a belief in survival of the soul on the basis of the evidence. And he's got a good chunk in his footnotes here. All right, so reincarnation in Jewish thought. Jewish thought sees the soul as one immortal continuum. In English, the word reincarnation is based on the Latin, which means entering the flesh again. In Hebrew, the term is Gilgal. Johnny Van Stein, good to have you. Okay. So in Hebrew, it's called Gilgal, related to the word for circle, and implies a continuous cycle of the soul. The concept of reincarnation may seem puzzling by nature itself, but nature itself seems to work in cycles. Consider a forest in winter. A superficial glance shows icy death covering the land, with bare trees, no visible animals, and a few, if any, signs of life. However, in just a few months, that same forest will be transformed, covered in lush foliage, and filled with the life of spring birds and animals. We're on page 274 if you're following along. Likewise, Rabbi Moshe Israelez, the 16th century sage known as the Rama, compares the Jewish soul to the cycle of the moon. Just as the moon appears to die monthly when it disappears completely, yet miraculously reappears again and begins to grow anew, so too with with souls that appear to die, only to live once again. Even within the human body, every day cells die and others are born to take their place. These parallels make it seem less far-fetched to believe that a soul is also reincarnated upon the death of the human body. In Jewish tradition, the soul can be reincarnated several times in order to correct blemishes from its previous lifetime, or to perfect something it left unperfected in its mission. Keep that, in mind, folks. The act of reincarnation is an act of benevolence where Hashem allows another chance for the refinement of the soul. It has been taught that the pious of the nations of the world also have the opportunity to be forgiven, uplift their being, and experience reincarnation. The Jewish belief. Josephus, the first century Jewish historian, writes that reincarnation was an accepted belief in Jewish circles. The Targum Onkelos, the first century Aramaic translation and biblical commentary, makes reference to reincarnation as well, and he cites where. Topics of mysticism were not commonly taught to any student during a significant period of Jewish history. Instead, these teachings were preserved in more secretive societies of Jewish mystics. For this reason, certain Jewish philosophers who did not receive these Kabbalistic teachings wrote against the idea of reincarnation on intellectual grounds. It could be argued that if they would have had access to these mystical traditions, they would surely have accepted the premise. The Sefer Habahir, which is attributed to the Mishnaic sage Rabbi Nukina ben Hakana, was the first Kabbalistic book published in the 12th century. The book takes the idea of reincarnation as given. The Zohar, another early Kabbalistic work, is filled with references to reincarnation. On the verse from the Torah, visiting the iniquity of the fathers upon the sons, the Zohar says that this refers to the soul that reincarnates several times to achieve its rectification. Likewise, the commandment of levirate marriage, Yibam, is also understood by the Zohar in the context of reincarnation. The 15th century sage Rabbi Shem Tov ben Shem Tov said that reincarnation is a fundamental belief in Judaism. Indeed, many sages over the course of the last several centuries have fervently argued that reincarnation is a mainstream Jewish concept. Included in this list are the Rambam, the Rakanti, Rabbanu Bakia, the Al-Shik, the Ramak, and the Or HaChaim. Some say that as the Rambam did not openly come out against the belief in reincarnation, this means he accepted belief in the idea. Rabbi Don Yitzhak Abarbanel, who was not particularly known for his mystical orientation, accepted the premise of reincarnation. Ultimately, it was the influence and legacy of the teachings of the Arizal that commented the concept of reincarnation as a core Jewish belief. Rabbi Yosef Karo, author of the Shulchan Aruch, writes about the reality of reincarnation in Majid Mesherim Matos Masai 1. Torah authorities after the Arizal until this day, whether Talmudic commentators, Hasidic masters, or scholars from outside of the Hasidic world, also accept the premise of reincarnation. Already by the 18th century, the great Halakha master Rabbi Ezekiel Landau wrote that the premise of reincarnation is accepted by both Kabbalists and the philosophers. Kabbalists linked and intertwined the dynamics of certain biblical figures through the lens of reincarnation. After the very first death in the Torah, that of Abel at the hand of Cain, Adam and Eve conceived and bore a third child, Seth, who was born instead of Abel, whom Cain slew. In light of reincarnation, this is understood to be a clear indication that the soul of Abel entered the body of Seth, as he took the place of Abel. In this light, statements in the Talmud or Midrash claiming that one biblical personality is actually the same as another biblical personality are viewed as open indicators of reincarnation. So when it says that Phinehas is really Elijah, Laban is Balaam, the 10 rabbis who died as martyrs at the hands of the Romans are actually the 10 sons of Jacob, or that Mordecai is Jacob while Haman is Esau, these are clear indications that of reincarnation in Jewish literature. One indication of just how mainstream reincarnation has become in Judaism can be seen in the introductory words of the bedtime Shema prayer in Sephard liturgy. God is asked to help us forgive anyone who has sinned against us, whether in this lifetime or in a previous lifetime. Understanding reincarnation, soul, roots, and sparks. Where does the soul go when it departs from the body? Does it remain in the spiritual realm or come back to the physical realms in a different body? The Jewish mystics teach that Adam, the first human, is not only seen as the physical parent of all humanity, he is also the collective unified soul, source from which all future human souls would come. After Adam sinned, his unified soul existence became pixelated or fragmented into individual soul, roots, sparks, as it were. These roots in turn divide into many individual sparks, which incarnate into bodies. Through living up to the soul spark's potential, it is illuminated, fixing and returning its peace to the cosmic collective soul of Adam. The physical body of Adam paralleled the spiritual soul structure of Adam. In this regard, there are souls rooted in the head of Adam, the heart, the hands, and so forth. Souls rooted in the head may gravitate toward intellectual pursuits. Heart souls may be full of emotion, and hand souls may have physical adeptness. The soul of Adam has 613 sparks or components corresponding to the 613 mitzvot of the Torah. Each of these individualized sparks in its own right reincarnates into a body to enliven it, existing as a primal spiritual monad of sorts. Each spark incarnated into a body also contains 613 sparks. Each of these likewise consists of 613 spark-like a fractal until infinity. Ultimately, when all sparks have been incarnated and then uplifted through completion of the commandments, the general soul of Adam will be perfected. Soul, roots, and groups. Souls tend to incarnate in groups, meaning many souls spark from the same soul root in the collective soul of Adam. These souls have a special soul affinity or sympathy toward each other. When people play a major role in our lives, it can indicate a shared soul root connection, or at least originating from the same broad area in the collective soul of Adam. This is not always the case, however, as even members of an immediate family can be comprised of different soul roots. This situation allows for complementary personal and spiritual growth. There are stranger things in heaven and earth, Horatio, than are dreamt in your philosophy. Interesting, Johnny. It is sometimes the reason why a family as a unit may gravitate towards a certain profession or have certain worldviews, specific preferences about living and the like. Yet there are commonly one or two members of the family that are on a different wavelength. Sometimes a friend will share a closer soul root than a relative. When two similar souls meet, there will inevitably be a strong attraction between the two. Furthermore, when people who are not of the same soul root play a role in our lives, these encounters are not a random collection of incidental meetings. Instead, they represent a cosmic soul connection. Often the people who are closest to us in one lifetime remain major players in other reincarnations as well. Sometimes the dynamic of the relationship changes and roles can be reversed. Parent child, teacher student, pursuer pursued, lender borrower, and so forth. Groups of people may return many times with the same sparks in a different dynamic until they accomplish their individual and joint life task. Reasons for reincarnation. The mystics write that a soul may have to undergo reincarnation to refine their soul sparks, i.e., to rectify and atone for certain sins committed or to complete a mitzvah, i.e., to finish some needed element of his life mission. When we hear the term reincarnation, we tend to think that the entire soul comes back to earth for another life. This is a misconception. Okay, get this clear. A person, individual consciousness is unique. After a lifetime in a body, the 613 sparks that make up that single soul unit are divided into three categories. Sparks that were damaged by sin or left incomplete, sparks that were slightly damaged, and the fully perfected sparks. So keep this in mind, folks. Fully perfected sparks are able to return directly to their divine source. However, those sparks that suffered damage may have to undergo varying degrees of the reincarnation process. And so is the concept of Gehenna, right? There's a refinement there that goes through a process to elevate that spark. Reincarnation for refinement. Reincarnation is for the refinement of the soul. Once the soul has been entirely elevated, it will not reincarnate again. There is a tradition among the mystics that a soul that descends 3 times into the bodies of 3 wicked people who collectively do not elevate even one part of the soul gets no more chances to reincarnate. In this situation, 3 is the limit. If some part of the soul has been elevated, then it can descend many more times. All of these descents are for the sake of ultimate perfection. When a person commits certain sins, there are refining agents in the afterlife to refine the soul and clean up any stains or blemishes that his sins have soiled it with. The process of purgatory or similar experiences in the hereafter act as a spiritual washing machine of sorts, preparing the soul to be in sync with godliness. Sometimes the refining agents in the hereafter will not suffice. The soul reincarnates into a person who must restrain himself from doing that particular sin. In doing so, the person uplifts that blemish and can ascend into the heavenly realms. How does one know that what area they need to focus on refining in his life? The Vilna Gaon says that one can easily identify what sin one is meant to be rectifying during his lifetime by assessing which is the most difficult sin for him to hold himself back from. Interesting. Whatever desires or bad character traits are the greatest struggle for him are the ones that need the greatest rectification. Reincarnation can be a punishment at times, and this is meant to cleanse the soul spark. This occurs when the soul reincarnates in a lower form of creation, such as an animal, plant, or even a rock. When a person acts as an animal during his lifetime, giving into all his selfish, natural, emotional tendencies, then he can potentially be reincarnated as an animal as a punishment. Measure for measure. It is through this that the soul atones for its previous misdeeds. Slightly damaged soul sparks can undergo a partial form of reincarnation called Ibur, Ibbur. In this case, the spark is sent on a short-term, purpose-specific incarnation into an already living person. Wow. The spark is not identifiable in the host body, but it can be refined and uplifted through that person's good deeds. At the same time, it must be emphasized that all of this is ultimately a kindness from Hashem. In fact, the Hebrew word for reincarnation, Gilgal, has the same numeric value as the word for kindness or hesed. Divine punishment is a means of attaining purification and is the mechanism by which a blemished soul can have the opportunity to ascend into a spiritual world. Ultimately, whether the soul is reincarnated as a human for the sake of perfecting it, or as a lower creature as a form of punishment and refinement, it is always an expression of divine kindness. In other words, Hashem owns it all, and he can do with it what he knows is best. Completing a commandment. Each soul has 613 sparks corresponding with the 613 commandments. When mitzvot are performed during one's lifetime, the corresponding sparks are refined. After death, the elevated sparks can ascend on high, and the remaining incomplete sparks must reincarnate to find their fulfillment. From each of these sparks, a new soul is formed that reincarnates into a new body in order to achieve this completion. There are certain commandments that are specific to various groups in the Jewish community. Some are relevant only for a Cohen, some for a Levite, some for the king, some that are only relevant in the land of Israel, and some specific to when the Holy Temple is standing. Sparks from the same soul root are incarnated into bodies from these different groups so that they together can fulfill all of the commandments and together perfect that soul root. Most souls around today are reincarnations of soul sparks that require uplifting. When all sparks have been incarnated, perfected, and uplifted, this will represent the rectification of the general soul of Adam and a return to Eden, which will ultimately become manifest as messianic harmony. Reincarnation and resurrection, okay? Rabbi Yedaya Bedurshi, a 14th century philosopher, wrote that resurrection seems to pose a problem for the concept of reincarnation. Bodily resurrection during the Messianic era is a fundamental Jewish tenet. If a soul is reincarnated several times, then which body is resurrected during this time? Various responses have been offered by the sages throughout the ages. The Abarbanel argues that the initial manifestation is the true one, as all other incarnations are completing the original mission. In his view, the first body would resurrect. Others argue the exact opposite, that the final body will be the one resurrected, as that is the finished product, the one that achieved the furthest perfection. In the Kabbalistic model of the soul sparks mentioned above, each spark will independently resurrect the body in which it occupied. Interesting. And therefore, each manifestation will resurrect. Knowing past lives. Remembering prior incarnations. Generally speaking, from the Jewish vantage point, a person does not have the ability to remember previous incarnations. If the average person knew their prior incarnations and what exactly they currently needed to perfect, their service of Hashem would likely be superficial, focusing on reward and fear of punishment. I'm glad you're enjoying it, Dewey. You ordered a copy, didn't you, Dewey? Additionally, they would likely have anger or resentment towards others who may have wronged them in a previous incarnation. Meditation or hypnosis might work in recalling memories from previous lives. At the same time, most people who pursue this often become overly wrapped up in the past, which skews their view of the present. We live in a society where many people struggle with the concept of who they are. What is the point of knowing who you were if you do not know properly who you are? Even without knowing the details of a previous incarnation, there are hints that indicate what the purpose of our current incarnation may be. When a soul is reincarnated in order to rectify a certain sin in a previous incarnation, the evil inclination tempting a person toward that sin in his current incarnation might be particularly strong. Conversely, if this soul was reincarnated to complete a certain commandment or aspect of the soul, the individual might be particularly drawn to those things in his current incarnation. In our days, without prophets or the spiritual giants from the past, Hashem places within the heart of the individual the ability to discern what is needed to rectify their soul. Hasidic tradition. As with many esoteric abilities that are unknown and unattainable by the average person, certain special Zadakim, exceptionally righteous individuals, are privy to knowing who they and who those around them were in previous incarnations. This is a result of having elevated themselves to the stature where they receive some level of divine intuition. Rabbi Isaac the Blind, a 13th century mystic, was able to tell which soul root a person came from. In Hasidic writings, it is taught that the Baal Shem Tov was a reincarnation of Rabbi Saadia Gaon, or of Enoch. Rabbi Yosef Yitzhak, the seer Hosea of Lublin, said to Rabbi Zelka of Grodzik that their love for one another was due to the fact that they had been father and son in a previous incarnation. Rabbi Abraham Yehoshua Heschel, I love Rabbi Heschel's material, of Apt, said that he was in his third incarnation and identified who he had been previously. Now, that was what I was thinking of getting into after we're done this book, a book called Between God and Man by Rabbi Abraham J. Heschel. Profound writer, theologian. I believe he died in 1971. He was a professor in New York of Jewish studies, but just profound writing. It might be something to keep in mind. Let me know what you folks think, because we're on page 285. There are hundreds of stories and accounts from Hasidic tradition. Hold on, Rabbi, let me see. And similar statements are made by Rabbi Menachem Mendel of Rimanov. It was said that Rabbi Ariel Lieb, the grandfather of Spola, was a reincarnation of the Maharal of Prague. Rabbi Shalom of Belz knew all of the incarnations of his son, one of which came from the root of the biblical Cain. There are hundreds of stories and accounts from Hasidic tradition of sages and Hasidic masters revealing insights and making corrections on reincarnated souls. A primary role of the Rebbe or Hasidic master was to ascertain the initial vision that God had for that soul and how to help the individual reach his potential through the lens of his incarnations. Many Jewish sages throughout history became practitioners of the soul, helping an individual to find his particular path of tikkun or soul refinement. Reincarnation and theodicy. Theodicy is an attempt to address the question of why God allows evil. Some classic works of Jewish literature write that reincarnation is the secret to theodicy. Rabbi Yisrael Meir Kagan, known as the Chafetz Chaim, once told a parable as to why one individual was poor and the other rich. He compared the plight of these people to a man visiting a synagogue. Upon entering during the morning service, the visitor sees many seemingly random people honored to read from the Torah scroll. One after another, they are called up from all different sides of the room. After the service, the visitor confronts the sexton and inquires about the order in which these people were called up. The sexton told him that because he was from out of town, it must have appeared as if there was no rhyme or reason to who was being called up and what order they were following. The sexton then went on to explain to him the exact reasoning as to why these people were called up and why in that particular order. The Chafetz Chaim explained that since in this world we have such a limited scope of the full reality, we are here for a limited amount of time and are confined by what the senses can perceive. Our initial assumption is that one being rich and the other poor is injustice. Meanwhile, we do not realize that in the previous life, the soul of the rich was poor and the poor was rich. They already faced and overcame those challenges and are now working through other challenges. In the Bible, Moses requests from Hashem, "Show me your glory." The Talmud explains that this is really an allusion to the grand question, why do the wicked prosper and the righteous suffer? As we read when we did our study on the book of Job. It is of no surprise that when Moses had the opportunity to ask God any question, this was one that he chose, as it touches to the very root of faith upon which the Torah rests. The Torah says that God responded by saying, "You will not be able to see my face," meaning that no mortal can gain an unadulterated perception of Hashem himself while alive. Even a man of the spiritual caliber of Moses was unable to experience this level of godly insight. The Midrash elaborates that Hashem actually did reveal to Moses a clue of how things work and why the righteous seem to suffer. The secret was reincarnation. Moses was shown the following scene. A prince passing a river on horseback stopped to drink and accidentally dropped his bag of money. He then galloped away. Soon after, a poor boy and his mother, who were enslaved to a wicked lord, found this bag of money. They took the money, redeemed himself and his mother from slavery, and lived happily ever after. Not long after this, an old man chanced upon that same river spot. He took a drink and lay down to rest. In the meanwhile, the prince realized that he had dropped his purse at that spot and returned to search for it. Unable to find it, he awoke the old man, who swore he knew nothing of the bag of money. The prince did not believe him, and he slew him. Upon seeing this, Moses was dumbfounded. Where was the divine justice? Hashem showed Moses another scene. A father and son, after amassing a small fortune for themselves, were happily walking on their way. All of a sudden, a man with a sword appeared. He took all the money and killed the father. All the while, a prince stood to the side witnessing the event, doing nothing to help. Hashem explained that the old man in the first story, who seemed perfectly innocent, was a reincarnation of the man who killed the father and stole the money in the second story. The child who struck it rich by finding the bag of money in the first story was a reincarnation of the child who had his money taken in the second story. A prince who in the second story did not help the father and son was penalized in his next incarnation by losing his money. He also killed the old man, whom he should have killed in the second story when he was negligent in helping. Moses then saw that the way Hashem runs the world is beyond reproach, and he carries out his way measure for measure. Hashem owns it and definitely is in complete control, and it does answer a lot of questions when we understand the innumerable scenarios and situations that go on. Hashem definitively runs the world, and to truly grasp how the justice is met out to the sinners and to those that are saintly, those that are truly pious. It's amazing to think that it could go on in this fashion. In essence, Jewish tradition teaches that many of the most difficult situations in life can be viewed as part in an ongoing chain of reincarnation. There is discussion in Jewish tradition that the deaths of young children, stillbirths, disabilities, and disease are rooted in the secrets of reincarnation. In other words, these souls often come from lofty sources on high and only need limited time or ability in order to refine and uplift the aspect of their soul that needs correcting. And why should they have to stay down here longer than need be? Think about it. Yet, my wife, who lost a young child, a son, before his third birthday, she grieves every year, but Hashem, gives peace. It's amazing. In other words, these souls often come from lofty. Okay, suffering without purpose is very lonely and disheartening. Having general guidelines as to the significance inherent in some of the most difficult situations may not take away the emotional hardship, but certainly brings meaning, relevance, and perhaps peace of mind. And this is what I was hoping we would come to understand when we ventured into the book of Job and then the 8 chapters of the Rambam. I love how Rabbi Taylor's worded that. Having general guidelines as to the significance inherent in some of the most difficult situations may not take away the emotional hardship, but certainly brings meaning, relevance, and perhaps peace of mind. Welcome, Book Mouse. Conclusions. With all the Jewish and secular literature addressed in this section, because he's got lots named of the soul, one cannot help but be in awe of just how profound our individual lives are and how our entire universe is vastly different than one would think based on a superficial assessment. Everyone and everything counts, and there is nothing superfluous or expendable. Likewise, nothing is forgotten, and ultimately all is created to ascend towards a deeper consciousness of perception of the divine. And that is Rabbi Taylor's section on the mysterious soul. And I think we're going to end that today. That finishes the chapter on reincarnation as well. Next, we're going to be getting into mysterious powers is the next section, where he starts to talk about magic and mysticism, auras and astral self, extrasensory phenomena. And then we get into some good stuff after that on mysterious places, where he's going to discuss the location of the Garden of Eden. We're making good time on this, folks. We may even be able to, at this pace, if I'm doing 40 pages or so a day, we may make it through. I don't know if we will this week. It's going to be close. We'll be real close. Maybe by next Monday we might finish. I'm going to have to contact Rabbi Taylor. See if we can get them in here. If has anybody got questions? Has anybody been recording any questions out there? What a profound topic. I mean, to think about near-death experiences and reincarnation. I mean, just to understand that, Hashem owns it all, and he knows how to sort through it better than we do. And the sheer concept that the soul is made up of sparks, divine sparks, and those sparks come from soul roots. Understanding the way things can click and connect and actually get mingled together, or re-meet, and the purposes behind it, it can help bring some solace to understanding why things are the way they are. I love how he pulled out that story that was supposedly given to Moses, where they show the two incidences, and that Hashem is showing that this is how the notion of reincarnation could be meting out true justice. The the injustice suffered in the second one is from mistreatment in the first, and vice versa. We got to hold in our hearts the true Amunah, true faith, true Amunah. It's got to hold that Hashem knows what's best and is capable. I mean, if he created all of existence, he is definitely capable of sorting through, for the rectification of all things. But to understand about the sparks, and that if the way sin affects those sparks, and the way doing the mitzvot purifies those sparks, hopefully people understand that what true growth can be and should be, and true development. And if you grasp that more and more, you'll then be better equipped to make the world an actual better place, and implement kindness and good deeds into the world, show acts of true loving kindness out there. And it's just beautiful material. Right on. Well, thanks for the compliment, Dewey. I appreciate that. It means a lot, I was thinking about jumping into this maybe after this. Between God and Man. It's called An Interpretation of Judaism. It's by Abraham Heschel. He was one of the great souls and one of the great Jewish teachers of our generation. Between God and Man remains the best introduction to his teachings, and that's by Rabbi Harold Kushner. But I found this book to be quite profound, to understand the difference between halakha and agadah, and when works are, when a position is personal and subjective, versus halakha is definitively objective and law. And when rabbis make halakhic ruling, they're doing it for the benefits of all people. And the only way they ever overturn or change is when the majority just won't accept it. It doesn't. It's of no effect, or creates more problems than it resolves. And their wisdom in searching Torah Tanakh for concepts. They want to make sure that when they make halakhic ruling, it's going to be in line with true godliness and Hashem's will. Beautiful material, but keep that in mind. Yeah, 2 weeks till Rosh Hashanah. Yeah, for those of you that joined us yesterday during Rabbi Goldberg's Sunday class, our Genesis class, he'll be speaking this Sunday. And instead of Genesis class, he's going to do a talk on Rosh Hashanah for those of you that are available. That'll be 1 p.m. Eastern, 10 a.m. Pacific, 8 p.m. in Israel, this Sunday coming up. Rabbi Chaim Goldberg of the Noahide World Center is going to share with us some details about Rosh Hashanah this week. It's exciting. We know it's only a couple weeks away. And we've been trying to talk about being prepared for this, so that next year for you is the best year, ever, that, Hashem truly influence your life, and that your life is actually correcting and amending the things that need work on, and adapting the cleaner, pious elements to make you a better person, so your life, and in fact, becomes a better person. And that at Rosh Hashanah, you get the mazalos that you need, to fulfill that for the upcoming year, and that your life become full. I just would love to see many more of you begin to walk into fulfillment of your potential, and that your lives be filled with great joy in service of Hashem, as we all walk according to the Sheva Mitzvot, trying to understand that which Hashem would have for us. It's always, you know, if you're tempted in any of these, and you resist because Hashem has commanded you not, that's where you're truly performing a righteous act. But if you don't have, if you're not tempted in any of those angles, it's not, um, it's of no practical use in your life. If it's just not something you would do. But understand that these are veins of gold that play out in so many different scenarios and situations and circumstances. Like theft can be, anything from finding money on the ground, by not seeking out who the owner was. It could be you're really, robbing somebody that really needs it. If you go that one extra step to say, hey, did anybody lose this? Or somebody gets fired from their job for giving too much change. It might only be a $10 bill or something, but it could be their 10th time doing it, and their manager's been watching them under deep scrutiny. You just never know, and you don't want somebody else's life crushed by an action that you've, kind of walked in without realizing it may be considered theft to keep that extra bit of change or whatever. Do it because Hashem says to do it. But grow in all that you are is my encouragement. And I find that even this book on the mysterious is giving us some framework to understand more of Hashem's sovereignty over all things. And I hope that was useful to you guys so far. So, join me tomorrow. We're going to come back tomorrow. We're going to talk a little bit. He's got his study on magic and mysticism, and we'll plunk into that and hopefully have a lot of fun. Hopefully you guys are enjoying it. It's always good to see many people come back again and again. It inspires me to keep going and sharing material with you, and hopefully you're liking these Rocky Mountain readings. So I'm glad when I get encouraged, and it's exciting. Makes me smile. But I can't keep doing this forever. My wife is going to be on me hard, and this is why I've been told Rabbi Goldberg I'd plug it this hard till Rosh Hashanah, and really revisiting, do I go out and get a job, or do I stay working at Noahide Broadcasting? We've got this International Noahide Network station up, which is not enough people are downloading it. And those that have, I just starting to see the 1 month stats. And it's, I'm excited when I see that people are downloading it, but where it needs to get to 10,000 downloads on Roku boxes in order to qualify for dynamic ad insertion, which then might make some viability. But, I know, so don't be afraid to share that. I did upload the Book of Job series onto that, and I'll set it up as a video on demand series if anybody ever wants to go back and review. There's more than a day straight, 1 day, 7 hours and 51 minutes, almost a day and 8 hours worth of series that we did on the Book of Job. That's up on the International Noahide Network right now. But please tell people about it. We need this to grow. We want to see more growth. Also this weekend, I know that Rabbi Chaim Goldberg and the rabbis in Jerusalem, they're doing another bet din where you can do your Noahide confession before 3 rabbis. It's you may want to check in and see if you can contact Rabbi Goldberg to get included in that if you haven't done something like that already and are interested. I want to encourage everything that they're supporting, that they're doing. They're really trying hard. Rabbi Goldberg's going at it with the Chinese. He's sharing with the Noahide Thailand class. trying to really share the Brit Shalom book with them now, since it's been translated into Chinese. Really laboring to make the world a better place. And, we need to continue to grow to see communities develop. Yeah. Well, yeah, if you always access through YouTube, Ashley, I don't know if you have Roku. A lot of people in the United States have dropped their cable subscriptions and bought these cable boxes through, Roku is the oldest. Um, I think you can online as well. I think if you look for Roku app, I think you can download the Roku app for Windows. They have Roku for Windows. Just type it as a Google search, Roku for Windows, and in there you can, download from Roku. Roku for Windows. You can download. Look for the International Noahide Network. Every download has to reach. I have to reach 10,000 downloads, which is a hard task. I mean, as part of the Noahide World Center, I've had the joy these last 3 years nonstop. I've been going at this. Rosh Hashanah will be 3 full years nonstop broadcasting with them, and I've had the joy to see the number of subscribers double. But we're not even at 4,000 subscribers here at the Noahide World Center YouTube channel, and I need to get 10,000 people on the Roku station before it becomes anything viable. But if it did, I'm personally committed to letting funds be used to grow Noahide communities. Hashem knows, and awesome, Ashley. It's always good, and I appreciate you continually coming. I don't know if we're friends on Facebook at all, Ashley, but if you ever need to chat and you want to talk, reach out to me on Facebook and friend me, send me a friend request, and appreciate you guys coming regular. It means a lot. What's the name of video of James? I'm not sure of the question, Frank. What video of James something? Do you want me to go back and look in yeah, I'm not sure. Anyways, so on that note, I'm going to sign out for today. So please come on back and join me tomorrow, and we'll keep going in the Jewish Guide to the Mysterious. It's amazing that when we sit down together and just spend a bit of time, regular study, we chunk through it, we learn together. It's great. Nice to be with you folks. So I'm going to sign out for now. You guys have a wonderful, wonderful day.